An arrow that saved a life amid a rain of bullets on the red sands. In the far west, the wind carried the scent of gunpowder and old curses. A lone rancher unexpectedly took in 2 Apache girls, unaware that the scars on their shoulders would drag all 3 into a deadly game with riders who feared nothing, not even death. From that moment, every dawn was stained with blood. The evening wind blew fine sand against Samuel's face, leaving a sharp, stinging sensation. The ranch was bathed in the deep crimson of sunset, the fence posts casting long shadows like bony hands reaching up from the parched earth. He had just finished tying the reins of his old horse when the sound of pounding hooves echoed from the distant dirt road. It wasn't the ordinary rhythm of townsfolk, nor the urgent chase of hunters. The hoofbeats were quick, broken by the metallic clatter of gear, like a warning. Samuel froze, narrowing his eyes, his hand brushing the Colt 45 at his hip. Through the drifting dust, 3 riders emerged, long dark coats, hats pulled low to hide most of their faces. One of them led 2 small figures whose heads were covered with coarse burlap sacks, hands bound tightly in front. "We brought you a gift, Samuel," a deep, raspy voice called out, punctuated by a short, harsh laugh. Samuel said nothing. He simply stared at the 2 small forms. A sudden gust of wind lifted the sack of the girl in front just enough to reveal half her face, and a pair of deep black eyes, gritty with sand, filled with both terror and burning hatred. A chill ran down his spine. "We couldn't keep them any longer," the rider continued. "They're Apache. The slavers want them, but we thought you might need them more." Samuel's grip on his gun tightened. He knew all too well that getting involved with the Apache meant bringing the flames of war straight to his doorstep. But when the girl's eyes met his for the second time, he saw something different. Not a plea for help, not mere fear, but a silent, urgent message. "If you don't take us, we will die." Samuel said nothing more. He stepped forward and untied the 2 girls. The rope, soaked with sweat and blood, had left deep grooves in their thin wrists. Both of them trembled, but not from the cold. This was something deeper, smoldering within their hearts. "Inside," Samuel said curtly. His voice wasn't exactly gentle, but it was enough for the girls to know this was not the voice of a man who would sell them. Samuel's old wooden house wasn't large, but it was far warmer than the open air outside. The light from the fireplace spilled across the walls, the flickering flames casting shapes like ghostly hands. He handed them some water, but the older girl took the cup slowly, her eyes darting to the window, as if afraid someone was still out there. When she lowered her head to drink, her collar slipped slightly, and that was when Samuel saw it, a round, burned scar on her left shoulder, as if someone had once pressed a red-hot iron into her flesh. He froze, her eyes instantly locked with his. In that moment, the room seemed to grow heavier. No words were spoken, but Samuel understood. This was no random wound. This was a mark the cruel men out there would recognize and hunt to the end. Outside, the wind howled harder. In the darkness, the slow, heavy sound of hooves echoed, each step drawing closer. Samuel knew the trouble was only just beginning. The wind carried a faint trace of smoke, so faint it could be missed, but enough for Samuel to know someone was burning a fire nearby. He closed the door and slid the wooden bar into place. His hand instinctively brushed against the Colt at his hip. The 2 girls sat close to the fireplace. The younger one kept glancing nervously toward the window, her posture small and guarded. The older sister sat in silence, her shoulders trembling slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket as if afraid it might slip away. Samuel poured more water and set it on the table. "Where did you come from?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. The younger girl only gave a faint shake of her head. The older one met his gaze directly, her dark eyes hard with resolve. Then, in a voice hoarse from thirst, she spoke in halting English. "They will come. They have this mark." Her finger lightly touched the scar. The firelight caught the burned flesh, making it glow for a moment. Samuel could see clearly now. It was a circle, with a strange symbol in the center, something like a letter, but warped by the burn. Suddenly, the creak of wood echoed from outside. Samuel gripped his gun tighter, motioning for the girls to stay silent. He stepped to the window and parted the curtain just slightly. In the pale, silver moonlight, standing motionless in the yard before the ranch, was a figure. A hood covered their face. In their left hand, they held a coil of rope. In their right, a long iron rod, the tip glowing bright orange from the heat, casting a sinister light in the night. A cold shiver ran from the base of Samuel's neck to his heels. He knew, without a doubt, that whoever stood out there was the one who had pressed the branding iron to the girl's shoulder. Samuel kept his eyes fixed through the gap in the curtain, trying to etch every detail of the figure outside into his mind. The shadow did not move, yet the glow of the heated iron in his hand flickered with each gust of wind, as if threatening every breath inside the house. He drew the Colt .45, the click of the hammer loading, breaking the silence. "Stay in here. Don't open the door, no matter what you hear," Samuel ordered, his voice low and firm. The younger girl clutched the blanket tightly and nodded. The older one looked at him, her gaze not exactly fearful, but carrying a different kind of concern, deeper. Samuel slipped out the back door, quietly circling toward the horse stable, his steps so soft that only the crunch of sand under his boots marked his passage. Moving along the shadows, he closed in on the front of the house. But just as he neared, the figure was gone. No hoofbeats, no running, only emptiness, and a glowing iron rod planted deep into the ground, smoke curling up into the night air. Samuel approached, his brows knitting together. Beside the branding iron lay a small piece of tanned hide. He bent down, and his chest tightened. Carved into the leather with a knife was the same circular symbol as the scar on the girl's shoulder, and beneath it, a shaky line of words. "We come at dawn." A faint sound stirred behind him. Samuel spun around, gun raised. The older Apache girl stood there, her breath quick, her eyes blazing in the dark. She whispered, barely audible, "You can't fight them alone." The wind rose, carrying the bitter scent of scorched metal and dry sand. In Samuel's mind, her words echoed like a dark prophecy. And dawn was only a few hours away. The night was still pitch black, but Samuel knew time was not on his side. He led the older Apache girl back into the house, slammed the door shut, and bolted it so hard the hinges squealed. The firelight flickered across all three faces, revealing lines of sweat and strain. Samuel set the heated iron on the floor, smoke curling upward and filling the room with the acrid scent of scorched metal. "Now tell me," Samuel said, locking eyes with the older sister, "who are they, and why do they want you this badly?" The girl sat still, her hand unconsciously drifting to the scar on her shoulder. The younger sister clutched her sister's hand, trembling. Then, as if deciding the time for silence had ended, the older one began to speak, slow and hoarse. "They don't just trade in people, they hunt. Children with special blood." Samuel frowned. "Special blood? Our father was the chief of an Apache branch. His blood is believed to carry the strength of the mountain spirit. They think if they sell children like us to warlords or the superstitious, they'll get gold, a lot of gold." Her voice faltered, but her eyes still burned. "This scar, it's not just a mark. It's a reminder that one day they will come back to take our lives." Outside, the night wind shifted. In the distance, a lone wolf's howl cut through the darkness, then fell silent. In that stillness, Samuel heard it, faint but certain, the sound of hoofbeats, not one, but dozens, drawing closer. He tightened his grip on the gun, his gaze sweeping over the two girls. "They won't touch you, not while I'm alive." In the east, the sky began to pale with a thin streak of gray. Dawn was coming, and with it, the hunters. The first light of dawn cut across the sky like a silver blade, revealing dark shapes on horseback emerging from the mist. Samuel counted quickly. At least 12 of them, all in leather coats, faces wrapped in scarves, revolvers and rifles hanging at their sides. At the center rode a giant of a man on a jet black horse, a leather whip in his hand, his eyes sharp as hooked steel. On his chest, Samuel saw it clearly, the scorched circle. the same mark as the scar. The small wooden house shuddered as hooves pounded the ground in a ring around it. One of them shouted, "Hand them over, Samuel. This ain't your fight." Samuel stood in the doorway, Colt 45 cocked, his voice thundering. "They're under my roof. You want them? You'll have to step over my dead body first." A mocking laugh rang out. Then suddenly, bang! A bullet slammed into the wooden post right beside his head, splinters flying. Behind him, the two girls cried out softly and clung to each other. Samuel stepped back inside, signaling for silence. He knew his gun only had a handful of rounds left, but the terrain and the clutter around the ranch were his only advantages. As the giant signaled the charge, Samuel flipped a table and emptied a sack of dry grain onto the floor, slick and noisy underfoot. He pulled a board across the window, leaving just a narrow gap for the barrel of his gun. The first riders burst into the yard. Bang! One went down, tumbling from his horse. Gunfire erupted in return, the door shuddering under the impact. Through the haze of gunsmoke and the thunder of hooves, Samuel glanced back at the two girls. "If they get inside, run north. Take the trail behind the stable. Don't look back." The older sister nodded, but her eyes held a fierce resolve. There was no intention of leaving him behind. Outside, the gang began to split, half circling toward the rear. Samuel's grip tightened on the trigger. He knew that with one mistake, this dawn would be stained in blood. Hoofbeats thundered behind the house like rolling storm clouds. Samuel knew they were trying to break in through the back. He fired 2 more warning shots toward the front, forcing the men there to scatter, then sprinted for the rear. As he rounded the corner, a shadow lunged out from beside the stable, the leader. The man was nearly as tall as his horse, shoulders broad as double doors, and his eyes. Samuel had seen them before, long ago. "So you're still breathing, Samuel?" The man's voice was rough, tinged with amused surprise. Samuel tightened his grip on the gun. "I thought you burned to death in that warehouse years ago." The man smirked. "I lost an eye, but I gained something else. Money, power. And now, I'm here to finish what I started." Samuel's gaze darkened. The past came rushing back. The fire in the border town, when he'd been deputy sheriff, and this man, a notorious slaver, had escaped with his life, but left behind dozens of dead Apache children. Samuel had thought he'd ended that monster for good. A shout rang from inside the house, the younger girl's voice. "He's the one who took our village." The leader laughed, drawing a black, polished revolver. "Bring me the girls, and I'll let you live. I might even cut you in on the gold." Samuel stepped forward, his eyes cold as steel. "You'll never lay a hand on them, not ever." The man raised his gun, but Samuel fired first. Bang! The bullet tore through the space between them and slammed into his left shoulder. His horse reared, screaming. Gunfire erupted as his men rushed in. Samuel fell back toward the house, firing as he moved, trying to keep them from closing in. In that fleeting moment, he knew he couldn't hold the cabin much longer, and the only choice left was to get the two girls out, before the noose of riders tightened shut. Samuel burst into the cabin, breathing hard, the smell of gunpowder and burning wood clinging to his coat. "Move, now," he barked, nearly shouting as he yanked the board from the back door. The two girls sprang to their feet, eyes wide with fear, but asking no questions. Samuel tossed each of them a small bundle, water, a bit of hardtack, and a dagger. "Stay with me. Don't look back, no matter what you hear." They bolted out through the rear, skirting the stable and cutting onto the narrow northern trail. Behind them, the pounding of hooves and the shouts of the slavers rolled closer, echoing through the chill dawn air. The desert was bitterly cold at sunrise. The sun's rays had not yet warmed the sand, but sweat already soaked Samuel's back. He knew that if they were spotted on the open stretch of sand, they would be cut down in minutes. At a bend in the rocky terrain, Samuel signaled them to stop. He pushed the girls behind a large boulder, then crouched to listen. The hoofbeats split in two directions, one group circling ahead, the other sweeping across the escape route. "They're closing the trap," Samuel murmured. The older Apache girl met his eyes, her voice tight with urgency. "There's a place. They won't dare enter." Samuel narrowed his gaze. "Where?" The tribe's old burial ground. They believe warrior spirits guard it. But I know it's more than that. Beneath it, there's a tunnel leading to the Western Canyon. He knew that if they went that way, they might stand a chance. But they'd have to cross over 100 meters of open ground, fully exposed to the rifles of their pursuers. The wind picked up, whipping sand around them. Far off, a sharp whistle rang out, the slavers' signal. They'd found the trail. Samuel tightened his grip on the gun and turned to the girls. "When I give the word, run with everything you've got. Don't stop. If I go down, keep running." The younger sister broke into tears, but the older only nodded, her gaze hard and steady, no longer trembling, but resolute, as if ready to die running toward freedom. Samuel drew in a deep breath, then sprang forward, pulling the two small figures with him into the open expanse of burning red sand. And the moment they cleared the edge of the rocks, gunfire exploded, shattering the dawn. Inside the ancient burial ground, the air turned suddenly, unnervingly cold. The dim light of dawn was choked off by towering totem poles carved with the shapes of warriors and hunting beasts. Each footstep echoed with a dry, hollow sound, like the muffled beat of a drum from deep within the earth. Samuel kept his gun in hand, eyes sweeping constantly over the surroundings. The two girls stayed close behind, their fingers brushing the ancient symbols as if searching for a hidden path. The older sister stopped before a massive standing stone. Etched into its surface was the same circular emblem as the scar, but in the center was the figure of an eagle, wings spread wide. "This is the door," she whispered, her voice trembling, yet sure. She crouched and pried loose a small stone at the base. A gap appeared, just wide enough for her to slip her hand inside and pull a wooden lever. The great stone shuddered, then slid aside to reveal a pitch-black tunnel, a cold draft rolling out laced with the damp scent of earth and stone. Samuel glanced back. Outside the burial ground, the shapes of the slavers still shifted at the edges, none daring to cross in. Even so, he knew they wouldn't give up. If they lost the trail here, they'd try to cut them off elsewhere. They stepped into the tunnel. The wind from outside died away quickly, replaced by the steady drip of water and the echo of their footsteps. The stone walls were carved with ancient images, Apache warriors fighting to protect children marked with the circle emblem. Samuel stopped short. One image froze him in place. A white man in a long coat standing beside an Apache chief, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young girl with the round scar. The man's face was his own, but at least 15 years younger. "That was my grandfather," the older sister said, her gaze locking onto Samuel. "He saved my grandmother from the slavers, and now you stand here, exactly like him." A chill surged down Samuel's spine. It wasn't just coincidence. His bloodline and theirs had crossed generations ago. And if the slavers ever learned this, they wouldn't just hunt the two girls. They would hunt him as well. Hurried footsteps echoed through the narrow tunnel, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and cold stone, each breath feeling heavier than the last. Samuel took the lead, Colt in hand, eyes fixed on the faint glow ahead. The daylight grew clearer with every step. It was the exit. But what made Samuel slow down was the silence. No birds, no wind, only a pale light spilling in like a sheet of silk stretched across the mouth of a well. The younger girl's voice broke the stillness. "We're almost out." Samuel raised a hand for her to stop. Kneeling, he used his dagger to prod lightly at the ground ahead. A sharp crack sounded, and a wooden spike shot up from beneath the earth, its blackened tip slick with some sticky substance. A pit spike trap. And if there was one, there would be more. He signaled for the girls to press against the wall, then began feeling his way forward, step by step. The tunnel suddenly widened into a round chamber with a high ceiling, sunlight spilling in from an opening above. But all around the walls were deep gouges in the stone, as though something heavy had been dragged through here before. A faint sound stirred ahead. Samuel raised his gun, stepping back half a pace to keep the girls behind him. From the shadows, a rope with an iron loop dropped down, missing his shoulder by inches. It was yanked back instantly, and from the mouth of the opening above, A familiar face appeared. The leader. His shoulder was bandaged. His eyes shot through with blood. "You think I was going to wait out there forever, Samuel?" he snarled, gripping the rope tight. Behind him, several more figures appeared, each armed with guns or knives, their eyes glinting with the intent to kill. Samuel tilted his head up. The exit glared bright above, but it was sealed off by their numbers. Retreat meant going deeper into the tunnel, where nothing waited but ancient carvings, and a dead end, and a... "No way out now, rancher," the leader said, his smile twisting, words hissing between his teeth. "Hand them over, or die here." Samuel's hand clenched around the grip of his gun. Behind him, the older Apache girl laid a light hand on his shoulder and whispered, "There is a way, but you'll have to trust me." Samuel didn't turn, but he could feel the older Apache girl's hot, urgent breath right behind him. "If this is a trap, all three of us die," he murmured, his eyes still locked on the leader leaning in over the mouth of the opening above. Her reply was short, certain. "Trust me. This is the path of the dead. Only my people dare walk it." Before Samuel could answer, she pulled him and her sister toward a narrow fissure to the left of the wall. The stone in front looked solid, but when she pressed her hand to an eagle-shaped symbol and twisted, it shifted open, revealing a pitch-black passageway, the cold air spilling out like a breath from a tomb. Behind them, the leader's shout rang out. "Shoot in there! Don't let them run!" Gunfire cracked, bullets ricocheting off the stone, chips spraying. Samuel dove into the gap, slamming the stone closed just as a round grazed his cheek, leaving a hot, stinging line. Darkness swallowed them whole. The smell of damp soil and long decayed remains filled the air. Samuel struck a match, the tiny flare revealing rows of stone niches along both sides, each stacked with human bones like silent sentinels standing guard. "This way leads down to the underground river," the older sister whispered, her voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the spirits of the dead. "If we're lucky, we'll reach the western canyon before they find the entrance." The sound of dripping water mingled with the echo of their footsteps. At a bend in the passage, Samuel suddenly halted. In the dim glow of the match, he saw fresh gouges along the stone wall, not the ancient marks, but the sharp scrapes of steel blades. The younger sister shivered. "They have been here before." Samuel snuffed out the match, pressing the girls back against the wall. In the distance, a faint light was approaching, accompanied by a low, familiar chuckle. The oil lamp's light swayed, casting flickering reflections over the stacked skulls along the walls, making them seem to grin in mocking silence. Footsteps echoed, steady, deliberate, then stopped. A low, gravelly voice drifted from the darkness. "I told you, Samuel. There's nowhere you can hide." Samuel signaled the two girls to retreat behind a large stone pillar, then crouched low, Colt ready. The lamp's glow crept closer, revealing the leader, cloak dust-stained, one arm bound in cloth, the other gripping a revolver, his bloodshot eyes burning with rage. Behind him trailed two of his men, each holding a curved blade that gleamed in the dim light. The tight space left barely a few paces between them. Samuel knew that if the man fired first, there'd be no room to dodge. "Hand over the girls, and you walk out of here in one piece," the leader said, a cruel smile twisting his mouth. Samuel's lips curled in disdain. "I don't bargain with the man who burned a village full of children." The leader's voice dropped to a growl. Then suddenly he lunged, his revolver aimed straight at Samuel's chest. Bang! The shot thundered, gunpowder smoke curling into the cold air. But no one fell. The bullet slammed into the stone wall, shattering bone fragments from the niches like a burst of pale snow. Samuel had twisted aside in time, swinging his gun's butt in a sharp arc that smashed into the leader's wrist. The revolver clattered to the stone floor with a sharp crack. One of the henchmen charged, his blade flashing, but Samuel drove a boot straight into his chest, sending him tumbling back into a recess filled with skeletal remains. The second man rushed from behind, but the older Apache girl suddenly stepped from the shadows, swinging a long bone like a staff. It cracked hard against his face with a sickening snap, and he crumpled. The leader staggered back, drawing a long knife from his belt. The lamplight shimmered over its blood-stained blade, and his eyes gleamed like those of a predator cornered. "If I die, I'm taking you with me." Samuel stepped forward, and the two began circling in the narrow corridor, the knife's edge and the Colt's barrel nearly touching. The mingled stench of blood, sweat, and the cold breath of ancient bones filled the air, each heartbeat pounding like the slow drum of a funeral march. The two circled each other in the cramped space, their ragged breaths mingling with the slow drip of water. Wherever the leader's blade slashed, the oil lamp's light flashed, casting long, twisting shadows across the walls of bones, like serpents slithering to life. Samuel dodged a thrust, swinging the butt of his gun in a sharp arc. Crack! Catching his opponent in the jaw. The man staggered, but roared, hurling himself forward like a wounded beast. The impact slammed both of them into the wall, bone fragments raining down around them. The leader's hand clamped tight around Samuel's throat, his knife pressing so close to his neck that Samuel could feel the chill of the steel. The reek of blood from the man's wounded shoulder was thick in the air, his eyes blazing with manic fury. "You will die with them," he snarled, his breath hot and harsh. In that instant, the older Apache girl appeared behind him, clutching a large skull in both hands. She swung with all her strength. Crunch! And the skull shattered against the back of his head. The leader crumpled, eyes wide in shock, before his body collapsed to the stone floor. Samuel shoved him aside, his heartbeat thundering. Blood from the man's shoulder wound spread across the gray floor, seeping toward the niches of bones, as if the past and present had just bled into one another. He looked down at the motionless figure, breathing hard. There was no need to check for a pulse. Samuel knew the man would remain here, among the lost souls. "Let's go," Samuel said quietly, his voice rough. "This place doesn't want to keep the living." The three of them hurriedly grabbed the oil lamp and pressed on through the narrow passage. Each step carried them farther from the stench of blood and the echoes of the fight, but in Samuel's chest, an uneasy weight lingered. Because outside, dawn was waiting. And dawn meant the hunters still alive would not stop. Their footsteps thudded against the dry rock walls, each beat carrying them closer to the faint glimmer at the end of the passage. The air began to loosen, the smell of damp earth giving way to the dry heat of wind and sand. Samuel moved ahead, gun at the ready. As they reached the end, the sudden flood of light forced their eyes to narrow. Before them lay a narrow opening that opened into a vast canyon, sheer cliffs rising on either side, the wind whistling through in a long, mournful howl. Across the gap was a narrow trail leading west, freedom, if they could reach it. But spanning the chasm was a rotting rope bridge, its blackened planks splintered with age, the twisted ropes creaking under the pull of the wind. The younger sister gasped for breath. We have to cross that?" The older one placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, her eyes resolute. "There's no other way?" Samuel glanced down. The drop was so deep it tightened his gut. One misstep and they'd vanish into the darkness below. But what concerned him more was the faint echo rising behind them, the surviving hunters, following the trail of blood and footprints to this point. "I'll go first, check if it holds," Samuel said, stepping onto the bridge. The planks groaned under his weight, the ropes swaying and shuddering with every step. Halfway across, he turned and signaled for the girls to follow. The wind gusted hard, making the bridge lurch sideways. The younger sister moved slowly, her knuckles white as she clung to the rope. Then a sharp shout rang out from behind. "There they are!" Samuel spun. Two figures appeared at the tunnel mouth, rifles raised. The first shot splintered a plank just beneath his feet, the whole bridge trembling violently. "Run, now!" he yelled. All three bolted forward, but when they were only a few steps from the far side, a bullet ripped through the left anchor rope. The cord snapped with a sharp twang, the bridge tilting sharply to one side, groaning like the death cry of some great beast. The bridge tipped fully to one side, loose planks snapping free and tumbling into the abyss. The wind lashed against their faces, carrying the roar of the chasm below. Samuel managed to catch hold of the remaining rope, pain shooting through his arm. Ahead of him, the younger sister's foot slipped, half her body dangling over the edge, her small hand clinging desperately to a rotted plank, eyes wide with panic. "Samuel!" the older sister cried, dropping to her knees to grab her sister's arm, but the weight pulled both of them closer to the brink. Behind them, a rifle cracked. Bang! The bullet grazing the rope, fraying it badly. One more shot would tear it apart completely. Gritting his teeth, Samuel inched forward, every movement a battle against wind and gravity. He lunged, seizing the younger girl's wrist just as the plank beneath her gave way. The sudden pull nearly dragged all three forward, the bridge swaying violently. "Hold on, don't let go," Samuel shouted, the tendons in his arms standing out like cords. The older sister hauled with all her strength to pull her sibling up while Samuel fought to keep his balance, eyes locked on the rope that was fraying by the second. His heartbeat roared in his ears. Suddenly, from the far side of the canyon, an explosion ripped through the air. Smoke billowed around the slavers' position. A section of the cliff collapsed, blocking their line of fire. "Run, as fast as you can," Samuel bellowed. They bolted the remaining distance, leaping onto solid ground, just as, crack, the final rope snapped. The bridge plunged into the void, vanishing into the endless dark below. They collapsed on the rocky ground, gasping, sweat and dust mingling into a salty tang at the corners of their mouths. Samuel looked back across the gap. The slavers were still there, but now they'd have to find another route, buying the three of them precious time. "We're not safe yet," Samuel said quietly, eyes fixed on the trail winding down toward the western valley. "Keep moving." And under the blazing light of the new morning, they walked on, carrying with them the breath of death that had just grazed their skin. The trail to the western valley wound between ridges of dark red rock, the hot wind curling around them, carrying the dry scent of sun-scorched cactus. Behind them, the sound of the hunters had faded, at least for now. Samuel led the way, gun still in hand, eyes sweeping side to side. The two girls followed close, their steps quick but no longer frantic as they had been on the bridge. The valley opened up, revealing a strip of low grass along a dried creek. Water lingered only in shallow pools, glinting faintly under the sun. They stopped to drink, their breathing slowly evening out. But as Samuel bent to scoop water, his eyes caught a mark in the sand. Not their own horse tracks, but fresh hoof prints, sharp-edged, the grooves of iron shoes still clear. He guessed they were no more than an hour old. He motioned for silence, pointing at the ground. The older Apache girl gave a small nod, then gestured toward a low thicket a few dozen meters away. Tangled in its brittle branches was a strip of torn leather, the kind slavers often used to tie their sidearms. Samuel's jaw tightened. "They've gone ahead," he murmured, "and they're waiting somewhere in the valley." The space seemed to close in. The wind was gone, replaced by the thick weight of watchful silence. The blazing sunlight only sharpened everything. Every shadowed rock, every dry bush could hide a gunman. The younger sister swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "If they're in front, how do we get through?" Samuel scanned the area, his gaze settling on the high ridge of rock to the right. An idea sparked. Dangerous, but their only chance. "We're not going through the valley. We're going over them." He turned to the older Apache girl. "Is there a way up to the top of that cliff?" She nodded faintly. "There is, but it's a goat's path. One wrong step, and you fall." Samuel gave a dry, humorless smile. "After that bridge, I think we're already used to that." The path began right at the base of a sheer rock face, so narrow it could barely hold the width of a single foot. Each step was a patch of rough stone, the outer edge dropping straight into empty air for dozens of meters. The wind was stronger here, carrying a faint tang of metal from sun-baked rock spurs. Samuel led the way, testing each foothold before shifting his weight, making sure nothing crumbled. Behind him, the older Apache girl guided her sister, her eyes fixed upward, matching each movement to Samuel's lead. Below in the valley, the hunters appeared, 5, maybe 6 riders, moving at a slow, cautious pace. They had no idea Samuel's group was directly above them, separated by only a few dozen vertical meters. The sound of hooves rose with the faint creak of saddle leather, winding Samuel's nerves tight as wire. One loose rock from this height, and the riders would be looking up in an instant. At a sharp bend, the path narrowed even further, forcing them to press their bodies against the cliff. Samuel reached a hand back. "Give me your hand." The younger sister's cold palm slid into his, and he pulled her across the slick patch. A pebble slipped loose, bouncing down with a faint clack, before striking a larger rock directly beneath the hunters. One of them looked up, eyes narrowing. Samuel instantly drew both girls flush against the cliff face, holding his breath. The wind whipped dust and sunlight between them, blurring the man's view. After a few stretched seconds, he lowered his head again and spurred his horse onward. They climbed on, finally reaching a broader ledge where a narrow fissure wound upward toward the cliff's crest. But just as they set foot on it, a sharp, piercing whistle rose from below, the hunter's signal. They had found the trail, and now they were climbing. The clatter of falling stones echoed up from below like the ticking of a countdown clock. Samuel glanced down. Shadows clung to the cliff face, moving faster than he'd expected. They knew how to climb, and they weren't afraid of heights. The wind at the cliff top howled so hard it pitched them sideways, driving grit and stone dust into their eyes. Samuel pressed the two girls into a narrow recess for cover, then checked his revolver. 3 bullets left. Too few to fight them all, but enough to carve an opening if he timed it right. Ahead lay a natural stone corridor, less than a meter wide, sheer wall to the left, and a drop into bottomless emptiness to the right. They would have to follow it to reach the western rim. Samuel moved first, each step deliberate, scanning the horizon. In the distance, he spotted a cluster of tall rocks forming a descent path. If they could reach it, they might slip into the narrow ravines below and circle behind the hunters. But from the far side, 2 figures emerged. They had climbed up from the west, cutting off the path. Both held revolvers, eyes lighting up at the sight of their prey. Samuel motioned for the girls to fall back. His spine pressed against the cliff as enemies closed from both sides. Below, the others were climbing fast, loose stones skittering down in warning of how close they were. The wind howled like the desert before a storm. Samuel knew, in seconds, there would be no retreat. He leaned toward the older Apache girl, speaking low through the wind. "When I give the word, take your sister and run, don't stop, whether I'm behind you or not." Her gaze darkened, but she nodded once. Samuel's arm tensed, his finger curling on the trigger, ready to fire the one shot that might blast a path between the sky and the abyss. The wind slammed sideways into them, its long, keening howl seeming to swallow the stone corridor into the abyss. Samuel kept his back pressed to the cliff, eyes locked on the 2 men blocking the path ahead. They edged forward step by step, the black mouths of their revolvers glinting with cold steel in the early sun. Behind him, the clatter of falling rocks told him the cliff climbers were nearly at the top. Only a few breaths more, and they'd be trapped from both sides. Samuel squeezed the trigger. Bang! The first shot hit the man on the left in the upper arm. He screamed, his gun spinning away into the void. The other man seized the opening, raising his weapon and firing back. The bullet grazed Samuel's shoulder, leaving a hot, stinging line of blood. "Run!" Samuel barked, shoving the older Apache girl forward. The 2 sisters darted ahead, sprinting through the narrow gap between the gunmen. Samuel fired his second shot into the rock just in front of the remaining man. Shards and dust blasted into his face, making him stumble back in a daze. From behind, the cliff climbers crested the ledge. One lunged with a knife, but Samuel twisted aside and slammed his gun butt into the man's chest, knocking him backward into the abyss. The wind devoured his scream. Another came charging, but only had time to see the Colt's barrel aimed squarely at him. Bang! The last round shattered the rock beneath his feet, sending him sliding down with a cascade of loose stone. Samuel bolted after the 2 girls. Ahead, the older sister had already pulled her sibling into the narrow cleft that led down, just as planned. He leapt a small gap, the wind surging under his boots, giving him the sickening sensation of freefall for a heartbeat before he landed. When all 3 regrouped, Samuel was breathing hard, sweat and blood streaking together down his skin. He cast a glance back toward the stone corridor. Only 1 man remained in the distance, but he stayed rooted in place, unwilling to advance. "Move," Samuel said quietly. "We're not clear yet," but they just lost the high ground. The sun had dipped low, bathing the western valley in a warm, golden-orange glow. Here, the wind no longer howled like it had atop the cliffs. It moved softly, like a hand brushing over the dry grass. Samuel slowed his pace, letting the two girls walk ahead, their quiet laughter ringing out like the return of a hidden spring after a long drought. They had left behind the land of fire, blood, and gunfire, at least for today. Ahead lay a line of gentle hills where the light stretched out like a quilt, unfurled to welcome weary travelers. Samuel paused, glancing eastward, where red dust still hung in the air like a memory that refused to fade. Inside, the storm had quieted, replaced by a slow, steady peace seeping into every breath. He knew he had changed, not only because of what he had fought to protect, but because of the people he had met along the way. The older Apache girl turned back, her dark eyes deep, but now brighter than before. She said nothing, only gave a small nod. Samuel returned it with a faint smile, a rare gift in a land where the harsh West seldom allowed such moments. They walked on, leaving behind footprints in the sand and stories the wind would carry away, yet the heart would remember forever.